the threat is the worst thing that faces mankind. And obviously, we hope that doesn't happen anywhere. It's not just here, it's around the world. And so I think there's a higher chance of something going wrong in the Korean Peninsula. I mean, it's slightly higher than it was before. And I'm hoping the experts of the world are doing all the right things to make that not come to fruition. But I don't think it's going to change my view of how we should grow around the world and work with each other and grow our economies. It's just this terrible threat hanging out there.
So you think the markets are right in not pricing anything? I mean, after all, the Asian markets have not fallen so much.
Yeah, I wouldn't price a crisis in North Korea or nuclear war into the markets. I think that would be a mistake. I've pointed out before, that geopolitics is always a surprise, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. It always scares you. You read the paper in the morning. But in history of mankind, it usually resolves itself. So I'm not saying I'm not prepared for a bad outcome. I'm simply saying I wouldn't expect a bad outcome.
There are some market participants perhaps who are now suggesting that perhaps it's best to recognize that North Korea is a nuclear power. Maybe that will be the more constructive way to approach. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to allow a person who's like that to have a nuclear weapon. And remember, that nuclear weapon can reach Tokyo, Beijing, Shanghai, Manila, Seoul, Korea. And I think it's a scary kind of concept. Most of the people who have nuclear weapons today are responsible. He doesn't seem to be responsible. And so, no, I think that would be a mistake.
Okay. All right.
And it could lead to other problems, and like even when you shoot these missiles, people, well, it's over Japan. Well, what if it landed in Tokyo by accident? And I just think those things can tend to have unexpected consequences that could be dire, and we should be very careful about that.
Well, let's get to.
And I think also China has a huge interest in not having him also having a nuclear weapon, because if they're not part of the solution, you're going to have nuclear weapons, in my opinion, in Korea. You have nuclear weapons in the Philippines. You have nuclear weapons in Japan. Everyone will go nuclear if he stays nuclear. And that is, now you have a much bigger issue.
Then it's a big issue, very big issue.
Right.
Okay, let's come to some measurable, parameters. The FOMC, the U.S. Fed, has stuck to its dot chart. Do you think they have done right with their latest move?
Yeah, I think they're doing the right thing. I mean, QE, raising rates is not a big deal.
But inflation is disappointed in the light of that.
I think inflation is kind of a semi-artificial number. The economy is strong. It's growing at 2%. I wish it was strong. I think it would be strong if America did a lot of better policy. But the fact is, unemployment is coming down, labor is working, wages are starting to go up. There's plenty of, in my view, slack in the system, so the housing is in short supply. There are more things to do. And as long as they are raising rates or selling, reducing QE in a strong environment, I don't think it's be that big a deal. So I think they're doing the right thing to start this process.
But, there is a dichotomy here. The Fed's view is probably 4 or 5 rate hikes in the next 12 months, but the market's not pricing even half that. So what's the outcome if the Fed is right?
Well, I think if the Fed is right...
I mean, how will asset allocation...
Okay, but you can't look at one thing separate from the other.
Okay.
If the growth picks up from here and the Fed is right and they raise rates a couple of times more, that's a good thing.
Okay.
They're not going to raise rates, in my opinion, if growth is much lower. So they're looking at it's hard to forecast the future, but they're saying if these things happen, here's what you can expect in rate raises. And at one point, they will be more right than the market. This might be that.
No, it's just that won't there be volatility in asset allocation? So should emerging markets worry if the Fed were right?
Yeah, a little bit, but again, what you see today in the world is almost, it's not synchronized, but kind of growth in Japan, growth in China, growth in Europe, growth in the emerging markets, growth in the United States. Brazil's gone from -4 to going to be positive here. That's a good thing. So if you're in the emerging markets, the most important thing is that you have growth. If America is doing a little bit better and our rates go up a little bit and it slightly changes flow of funds between some of the emerging markets in the United States, that's trumped by the fact you have more growth in the emerging markets. So I wouldn't be that worried about it.
Okay, actually, now that you speak about President Trump, the markets don't seem to be pricing much by way of tax reform. If he indeed delivered, do you think we have much more upsides in U.S. equities and global equities?
Yeah, so remember, it's been 7 months. Yeah. And I don't think any president delivered something like comprehensive tax reform in 7 months.
Okay.
And the people in the administration, and Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Cohn, the senators, the congressmen, all say they're going to work on it and they're going to get something done. We need comprehensive tax reform. It's been driving capital and brains overseas. It's hugely inefficient. And I hope they get it done. I don't know the odds. I can guess, but you can guess just like I can. But if they get it done and it's meaningful, I think it'll drive far more growth in America. It's only one of the things we need to do. We need to also moderate some of the regulations, start to build infrastructure better, do a better job in education. So I've been a strong believer that we're going to 2% in spite of not having good policy. Okay. We'd be growing faster had we had really good policy.
Well, but the financial markets have otherwise been what Robert Shiller calls obese. He was on our channel saying that the U.S. markets PE, the CAPE, cyclically adjusted PE is at 1929 levels. Is that a worry?
Well, there are a lot of ways to calculate PEs. Okay. Again, when you're talking about the future, you have to say what you expect to happen. Okay. If the future is very bright, no, the PEs will be fine. If you said in the upper quartile evaluation.
You said this country, let me ask you more questions about your impressions on India. You come every year. You came 3 years back when the current government was sworn in. At the end of 3.5 years, what's the sense? Has the needle moved?
Yeah, I think it's moved a lot. When you look at, first of all, you've been growing. I know everyone's disappointed here that's 5.7% and not 7%, but that's still a lot of growth. And of course, you should aspire to do 7 or 8 or something like that. But I think your prime minister has done some very smart, tough things to do. It's amazing that he has created a majority, but the tax he put in place, the finishing the biometric, bankruptcy laws, real estate, these are things that the public says is great, but they are setting the road to have better growth forever. And so I think it's a great thing, and growth is what's going to enable you to lift up your people and do the next round of things: affordable housing, better education, et cetera.
But growth hasn't come. It's fallen from 7.6 to 5.7, and even your brokerage has actually gone neutral on India because the earnings growth is not double-digit. Yeah. The earnings growth started off, the estimate started off at 14, even 18 in some brokerages, and is now at 8. Is that a worry?
No. Okay. Again, I'm not a politician, but what a country needs to do is set up all the things that make a country grow: education, health, infrastructure, competitive tax system. So I know for a fact when I come back in 10 years, India is going to be a lot bigger than it is today.
Of course.
Now, of course, you want 7 or 8%, not 5, 7, but I think people overreact to a short-term number because you can get a bigger short-term number, but make the wrong policy decisions. You're making the right tough policy decisions. Sometimes it does have a small negative number, like your demonetization, maybe. But if you reduce corruption, if you create formation, if you create this digital world that you're talking about, it will lead to far bigger growth in the future and lifting up all the Indian people.
Well, demonetization, I heard your positive comments on that, but actually that lost us a lot of informal jobs, we are told.
I've read all the things about it, and no one's quite ever done it, but it also, in my view, created a lot of bank accounts. Got probably reduced a bunch of corruption you don't know about, brought a lot of things back into the real system. So it had all these benefits, and maybe it had some negatives, but other countries are talking about doing it too, so I'm sure it would be deeply studied what you did here.
Okay, yeah, I know it's evoked a lot of curiosity, but you're not very sure. The jury is out on its benefits and costs. Right. But, you also, let me come back to the growth issue. While you say that you don't worry about one quarter getting to 5.7, and that's a good number, the government is not thinking on those lines. I mean, after all, the finance minister spoke at your conference, and it looks like they may even increase the fiscal deficit to ensure some stimulus. Is that a good thing to do? I mean, we already are at about 3.2%.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, again,
it's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, remember, your deficit's been coming down. Your rupee has been getting stronger. The country's going at 5.7%. They should have their own goals and aspirations, and there are a lot of policy tools. But what they need to do is figure out which ones they want to execute, how they want to execute it, what they can accomplish, what the pros are and what the minuses are. So I don't think government should say, well, you can't get the deficit up at all. Like in the United States, I think competitive tax reform is more important than how it affects the deficit in 1 year. And so I think people should think about good long-term policies, spend more time thinking about that and why it's good to do, and not do the wrong thing because of a short-term number.
Okay. Well, we have tended to be, reneging on fiscal deficit in previous years, so it clearly today has created a scare in the rupee market and in the bond market. But let me come to the other big challenge in front of the Indian government, and the finance minister spoke about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, remember, your deficit's been coming down. Your rupee has been getting stronger. The country's going at 5.7%. They should have their own goals and aspirations, and there are a lot of policy tools. What they need to do is figure out which ones they want to execute, how they want to execute it, what they can accomplish, what the pros of that are, and what the minuses are. So I don't think government should say, well, you can't get the deficit up at all. Like in the United States, I think competitive tax reform is more important than how it affects the deficit in 1 year. And so I think people should think about good long-term policies, spend more time thinking about that and why it's good to do, and not do the wrong thing because of a short-term number.
Okay. Well, we have tended to be, reneging on fiscal deficit in previous years, so it clearly today has created a scare in the rupee market and in the bond market. But let me come to the other big challenge in front of the Indian government, and the finance minister spoke about recapitalizing public sector banks at your conference. How would you tackle the Indian public sector bank problem?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a long-term view.
Yes.
I think a lot of countries have state-owned enterprises.
Yes.
I think in general they're a bad idea. You know, they lead to a lot of corruption, misuse of resources, particularly in banking. I'm not talking about India yet, but particularly in banking. You know, they lend to friends locally. They support businesses that should be allowed to shrink or go bankrupt. And they lead to bad long-term. So I'm kind of against having a public banking sector. There are reasons to have public-owned entities. So I'm not arguing that, and we could talk about each industry and why it might be better off for the people this way than the other way. So I'm not saying it should be just one way. But you should recapitalize, but you should set up new governance going forward so it doesn't happen again. Yeah. You've seen a lot of countries, they've recapitalized, and they recapitalize again in 12 years, and they recapitalize again in 12 years. And the reason people lend is to keep jobs and all these kind of bad reasons in the long run, but good reasons in the short run. So I think your government's been doing the right thing, looking at industry by industry, whether they should be public, whether they should be private, how they should be recapitalized, and it'll be very important to future growth. I mean, if you go to China, for example, they have a lot of state-owned enterprise. They understand that that's part of the reason they have high corruption, misuse of assets. That's why they talk about market reform. Those assets would be far better used in the public market than privately.
Well, actually, Korea, for instance, many countries privatize their state-owned banks under duress. We are probably having the luxury of, recasting them in peace times, in normal times. Right. So what would the advice be? Should they be privatized, or should they be reformed in the public space?
I would start the path to privatization. You will have a healthier enterprise. It may have a different mission than other banks. So you go to a lot of countries that say, this bank will be doing local agriculture. I would begin the reprivatization. That will put better transparency, better governance, and probably the chance you won't have to recapitalize again.
Okay.
And some countries have done a very good job allowing institutions to manage themselves properly while being owned by their government. Yes. Others, they constantly are interfering with it, and that becomes a huge problem.
Yes, we do have some state-owned enterprises which are run very well in India as well, and even in the banking space.
Exactly.
But you spoke about the Bankruptcy Code, and that's brought a lot of stressed assets into the bankruptcy courts. Do you see a lot of Indian assets getting bought, foreign interest in them? What's your overall comment on the bankruptcy process? Yeah.
I'm not an expert in the Indian bankruptcy process. I do think if you go, again, country by country, it's important you have an efficient process. It allows people to go bankrupt, be restructured, reuse and repurposing of assets. It's a healthy thing to do properly and effectively and quickly. Okay. It's not a healthy thing when these things exist for 10 or 20 years in a court.
Oh, absolutely. Well, actually, this is the first time, the only time, I guess, I have the privilege of probably talking to a potential U.S. presidential candidate. Am I?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought you had expressed interest in prior years. Not at all?
No.
Okay. Well, let me come to the other issue that you have been you've been in the news for. Bitcoin. You call it a fraud, but I believe your own units have been buying them on dips.
I saw that. No, we don't buy them dips. I think that we've done something with the Bitcoin exchange. Okay. So separate, blockchain is a technology. It can be used for multiple things, including cryptocurrency. It can be used for digital dollars. And there are digital dollars already. Like a lot of the dollars held in our bank are digital. And so so separate the technology. What I've said about Bitcoin is that countries form a currency. You have a wonderful currency. Yes. When you formed your nation in 1947, one of the first things you did is create a central bank with a currency, and that currency is part of your national heritage, because on the back it's got the 17 or 19 languages of the languages here. Countries form their currency. They like to control their currency. So right now, I say these crypto things are kind of a novelty. People think they're kind of neat. But the bigger they get, the more government's going to close them down. And they're also used a lot for illicit purposes. So you've seen China just go after them. So that's what I've said. I mean, you can like it or not like it, but my own view is that eventually government's going to close it down. They like to control their currency. They like to know who has it, where it goes, why it goes, when it goes. They like to see it. And the cryptocurrency is the opposite. So again, I would prefer digital. You might have a crypto dollar. I would prefer that than a cryptocurrency which is not a fiat currency.
Fair enough. Yeah. No, it's just that, ultimately all currencies are created out of thin air. And, there is a central bank backing, there is a sovereign backing, but it is still created out of thin air. And this currency at least has a stable quantity, whereas other currencies backed by central banks have quantitative...
I know, but those central banks, it says legal tender. You have to take this as payment. It's very cheap to do. It's very easy to move back and forth. JPMorgan moves $6 trillion around the world every day, very efficiently, very quietly, very effectively, and very cost efficient. It's all digital money moving around the world. So you got to say, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And so again, I'm not against the technology, but creating money out of thin air without having a government backing is very different than creating money having a government backing.
So generally, you think,
and like I said, the other thing is it's not unlimited. So Bitcoin has that, no more than 21 million. So maybe that kind of does something there. But there's Ethereum, there are ICOs, there are cryptocurrencies everywhere. It's creating something out of nothing that, to me, is worth nothing.
You think they could end badly? Is that a fear?
It will end badly, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it'll end when people lose a lot of money, the government's going to come down, when people think they use it as an investment, or it becomes too big, where governments say, we want to control it now. And I've had many people say, well, how can you control Bitcoin? It's very simple. If I said to everyone in this room, if you buy or sell a Bitcoin, if you bet to buy and sell a Bitcoin, if you or bet anything, I'm going to put you in jail, it's over. And so watch what's going to happen in China. It doesn't mean people won't do it. It just means it'll be a black market, which is a whole different thing.
Well, finally, what is your big takeaway from India? I mean, you've gone through this conference where you've met a lot of bright people, and of course many politicians as well. What is the big, new message you're taking home?
You have terrific leadership, and that leadership is making a change for all the Indian people, and some of it will be generational, and it's hard to do. So my view is people should look at the hard change, which is going to be great for the future of India, and that's my takeaway. Right. We have, just so you know, I want the public to know, we have Indians who run huge parts of our company, including investment banking, EMEA, M&A in the U.S., which used to be a pure male domain. It's a female, Indian female. The person who runs our global technology that's a lady too, but global technology for the investment bank is an Indian. Our head of emerging markets currency trades is Indian. So we've been blessed to have really smart Indian talent with us.